welcome to Tyrannius Hall, a grace-filled space for us to discuss the missional mandate of the Canadian Reformed Churches. My name is Winston Bosch, and I'm here with my co-host, Bill. Bill, how you doing?
Very well today, Winston.
Good. So today's session, we're going to be talking to a Canadian Reformed pastor who has both international and Canadian mission experience, and he's got all kinds of interesting things to say about his past experience, but also how that relates to him being a pastor now of a Canadian Reformed congregation.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have Julius on our podcast. He's a very thoughtful individual, and of course, he's going to bring to bear his experience in Brazil, a country that largely identifies as Christian. Now, of course, he's a pastor in the Edmonton area in a country that's largely post-Christian. And we're particularly interested in Julius, what Julius has to say, because his church has recently posted for a position. They want to hire an outreach coordinator, an evangelist of some sort. And so we're going to probe him a little bit about that decision and what exactly their intentions are for this individual.
All right, so here's our conversation with Julius van Spronsen. Well, hello, everybody. And we're live. Good to see you both. My co-host here, Bill, and today we're with the Reverend Julius van Spronsen. Welcome, Julius.
Thank you very much.
Really good to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thank you.
So you are dialing in from Edmonton, Alberta, my place of birth. You're the pastor there at Emmanuel Canadian Reformed Church. But before you came to be pastor there in Edmonton, you were a missionary in Brazil. And so maybe we could start today's conversation by you telling us a little bit about how long were you in Brazil and what exactly were you doing there?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And even before Brazil, I was up in northern BC.
Yeah, that's right.
There was outreach being done both in the city, or the town, I should say, and then also about 2-hour drive away, there was a church plant in Fort Babine. So there was that experience as well. In Brazil, I was involved in different things. I had a year to decide what I wanted to exactly focus on. And we decided to really work on the idea of getting the gospel to as many people as possible. But we had very few resources. So we tried to look for the key injection points where we could reach the most people. That was done by using the resources we could have, like a lot of the internet was available. The Latin American culture is very relation-oriented, and so the social media was a helpful way to make connections between people to become known. So what I was involved with at the end of the day, there was church plants. So the Brazilian churches, the Reformed churches of Brazil, they had some federations. There was a big Presbyterian denomination as well, and they had churches basically all over Brazil as well. So through contacts with them and relationships with them, we could kind of decide where would be good places to go. So we thought, and then the Lord just gave us the work plan, and people came into contact with us asking to learn more about the teaching of Scripture with respect to, historically, but also with respect to the preaching, to the offices, to the care of the congregation, right down to family life. And through contacts with people who came reaching out to us and following up with those contacts, that was a major bulk of the work. It led to about 6 different churches that we were coaching along, doing visits, working with the office bearers in about 6 different cities as well. After that, we started on a seminary, and we did try to do work through a seminary as well, where a lot of the stuff was published on the internet. In addition to that, we were focusing on some conferences. So there were some very annual conferences to draw people from the city to us in that sense, instead of looking to see who would be interested in hearing what we had to say. We would have a big conference and work on advertising, and with the hope that people would come out of the woodwork. And you got to understand, these aren't small towns. It was all, big cities between 3 and 8 million people per city. So, and distribution of literature was another major focus: translation, distribution of literature, and regular speeches.
All right, thank you very much. And I just found out just prior to going on air or going live here that Bill, you spent some time with Julius in Brazil as well.
Yes, Julius and his family make wonderful hosts. I had a very wonderful time in Recife there, lived on the Van Spronsen compound, and really enjoyed the time I spent with them. I do have a question for Julius.
Yeah.
Julius, if you look at the numbers, the vast majority of Brazilians identify as Christians, unlike, far more than here in Canada. And yet, in some sense, I would argue that there's more of a Christian culture in Canada than in Brazil. So I'm thinking of bribery, for instance, or something like that. How do you make sense of that, where so many people identify as Christians and yet really aren't living out a Christian life? And what did that mean for you with a lot of evangelistic interest and passion?
Yeah, thank you. That's a big question, in the sense of it's not that easy to just explain simply. I can describe, some of the things you're mentioning exactly, that the populace is largely Roman Catholic, and if not Roman Catholic, then evangelical or Protestant, I guess, in its most general sense, or self-identification. And then what? So the two are not friends, the Roman Catholics, and if somebody would leave a Roman Catholic church, they tend to be, let's say, opposed or past it, I guess. And so that there's many Brazilians identify as Christians. In fact, they told me that people on census, when they do a census, they'll put Christian just because that's socially acceptable. It's more socially acceptable to put Christian on the census than not. And I think so that's kind of indicative of what the culture Brazil is like. It's important for who you are to also identify as Christian. That's changing, especially among the elite and the universities and the government officials. But it's just the general numbers. A lot of that is what happens.
Perhaps I could interject here, because when I was in Brazil, I observed something interesting, that a lot of vehicles had the name of God painted on the side. There were a lot of motorcycles with the image of Jesus' face on the headlights. And initially, it looked like something quite encouraging, but you gave another explanation for why that is so. And it might be interesting to share that with others.
Well, yeah, and if you want to actually even, if I don't remember exactly what you saw, but it's very common on the mud flaps to have a picture of an outline of Jesus' face or some sort of symbol, a Bible. The other mud flap often had a very curvaceous outline of a very curvaceous woman, and it showed that the sincerity of the one mud flap, I guess it was a question which was more sincere. A lot of the understanding among many of the people in Brazil that I spoke with and explained the same question to me, they would explain that, they would relate that, they say, yeah, that's because they want the help of God. It was very superstitious. The other, in the car, to have a Bible on your dash to keep you safe from accidents. Maybe it was they drove like they thought it was very good insurance. Let's put it that way. Yeah, that's one explanation. There is another. I mean, we can go into it quite a bit. I find it striking. There's an element of obviously the point is it's very superficial Christianity. What we mentioned about census and then superstition. There's also very traditional, and that's very common. I think also that's the Canadian element. I think there's a similarity. There's traditional Christianity that you see as well, but it's quite superficial and going through the motions. And we would challenge people. We would say, if there are this many, if the percentage of Christians in Recife is at this level, why is our murder rate? Why are we looking at 30 to 50 murders recorded per day, going up to hundreds on the weekend? Like, the numbers don't relate very well. So, yeah, I guess those are some initial thoughts. I'm no expert on it. These are just observations, obviously.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Let's shift from South America back to North America. So you've been a missionary already in North America. You spent time in Brazil. Now you've come to Edmonton, Alberta. Talk a little bit about, from a missionary's perspective, some of the similarities and then some of the big differences, or I guess you could say, yeah, the similarities and then the particular challenges you would have thinking about mission in North America and how that contrasts to Brazil.
Yeah, I think the first thing is the importance of understanding the culture, Canadian culture, but also I think from one part of Canada to another part. So I've never lived in Alberta before, Northern Alberta, and it takes a bit of time just to understand the culture of Edmonton. I think we have to be sensitive to the difference between East and West, for example. And so that's part of the challenge of coming here. Similarities, when I was in Brazil, all the people, the millions of people we saw are all made in the image of God. They all, they're waking up in the morning, they could see a face in a mirror. They had a task to do. Maybe it was go to the line of cars and sell candies and just get enough money to to have food for the day. But they had a task to do that they were busy with, facing a lot of suffering. There's a lot of fear of others. There's a lot of loneliness. There's searching for some meaning to life. That's pretty global from what I've seen, with all the caveats about cultural differences. And I think that similarity is very important to highlight. You can look at yourself in the mirror. We're all unique, that's for sure. And yet there's a human nature. There's a similarity that's very similar. So in terms of similarities, I really get a sense of that being here in Canada. The needs are if you look at the base needs, they're very similar. And I'm talking about, people who've been brought up in a Reformed church from birth and through baptism and profession of faith, or whatever their lives look like, and somebody that I don't know, but I'm buying some groceries from, working at a gas station or however, just people I might need in a day. That's a very important picture of the similarity that really hit me, and having lived in different places now. So in terms of the challenges, unless there was a comment brothers want to make on that point specifically.
Oh, I find that just beautiful. I've also worked in other cultures and spent parts of my lives in different cultures than my own culture. And there's so many things that are different, but there's a lot more that's the same than there is different. We've got one race, the human race, and we all share the same fundamental beauties and all the same fundamental challenges and needs. So yeah, amen to that. I'd be really interesting to hear, unless Bill has a comment about that, to then hear about some of the differences or the challenges that you have as you come back into Canadian culture and thinking about mission work here.
Yeah, again, this was an interesting question. Probably a little bit part of my personality. When you come in, you see the task, and it's before you. So I thought, what were some of the challenges? And I wasn't sure what the question in terms of what should I do, or in terms of things that I found unsure or stuff I was frustrated about. I wasn't exactly sure on how you wanted me to comment on that, or what I felt, or what I thought.
Yeah, I'm not thinking so much like your specific challenges as a pastor of this local congregation. I'm just sort of thinking, when you think about mission work in Edmonton, for instance, what are some of the peculiar challenges or the particular challenges that you think when you think about mission work in Edmonton that may or may not be different than when you think about mission work in Brazil?
Yeah, well, the first one is that in Brazil, I could talk very openly and very quickly about who God is, what they thought about God. Are you a Christian? What does that mean for you? What church do you go to? And I would get an answer, well, I'm not a Christian, but I'm a friend of the gospel. I would get an answer, I'm Roman Catholic, which they always said, I'm not a Christian, I'm a Roman Catholic. I always pursued that. I said, well, I put that in the category of Christian. And then there was, so that conversation, I could sit on a bus, an airplane. I met so many people, and it was quite easy. Here, that's almost an offensive introductory question. And so you can't assume that you're going to have an opportunity to speak about the faith, about their heart. So that's part of it. Even the openness of Christianity in Brazil compared to North America, to Canada, and I'll just limit it to Edmonton. I can't speak to every community in Canada. The next is also the character of Brazilians. Say the cold climates. They say you guys you're always shuddering, and you have to keep your mouth closed so it doesn't get too cold in your heart. So they understand us as more closed. I don't agree with that 100%, but it's certainly true that we are more guarded as Canadians about ourselves, and I think there needs to be a lot more trust and relationship before we enter into questions concerning our hearts, our faith. And I am Canadian by birth, and I recognize that in myself as well. I'm not as forthcoming as the people I met. Again, it's this tiny percentage, but of the Brazilians that I met and on my travels there. So those challenges right away make the question, okay, well, how can we build relationships which seem to be necessary to go forward? So there's maybe a primary step or a priority that has to have our focus that I didn't really need to worry about in Brazil. The third factor, I think, in terms of what I encountered, and again, I think it's a population question. Just there's very few Canadians. Our cities are tiny, the little insignificant things, and there's just not a lot of people. And so when we were in Brazil, there's just so many people, just percentage-wise, the amount of people interested in the gospel and the lack of workers who were really interested in trying to reach as many people as possible. There's a lot of workers in Brazil who are busy and faithful, but they're focused on their local congregation. So I'm just speaking about those really interested in reaching out as many people. So a few of those, but so many people that were interested coming to us, that took up our time. And we always said, let's send 20, let's send 30 guys here just to follow these leads. Never mind to go beyond that. And whereas in Canada, that's not the case. There's interest for sure. There's people coming in. You can get to conversations about faith. There's loneliness. There's a seeking in Canada, but not necessarily going to the church to find the answer. So the same amount of seeking, the same amount of need, the same amount of loneliness, the same desire for truth, I would judge here in Canada, just not the idea, top of the list, the church will give the answer. In fact, there's a lot more distrust of Christians, the Christian church, and some of that with very good reason. Let's be honest about that too. So I think if those are the top three challenges, in terms of the people that you work with, I found here anyways, there's a lot of interest in sharing the gospel, and there's more resources, and not just financial, but just human resources that I'm able to work with here in North America. So I'm very optimistic, I guess, putting the two together.
It is very interesting. I talk a lot with my colleague locally, Ian Wildeboer, and when he was in Papua New Guinea, he could preach to large crowds of people who would come out to hear the gospel, and that's not what you're going to find here in Canada. So we do face a different context. If you look at the studies, you discover that, though this is a secular country, less than 20% of the population identifies as atheist. So there are a lot of people who still believe in prayer, who believe in a higher power, a God or gods of some sort. And I wonder what that means for us in terms of our outreach. There are also a lot of people who had some kind of background, maybe early on in their life in the church, and and now are detached and even resistant to church. Church as an institution is something that doesn't really interest them, though they do identify as spiritual people. Is that a phenomenon that you encounter out west as well? And do you have any ideas for how we might best reach out to a population like that?
Yeah, these are the questions I need to work on. I was asked to speak. I said, I think I should just listen to Winston and Bill and not say too much. I have a lot more to learn than to contribute.
I want to ask you this question. You talked about the importance of contextualization, listening to people where they're at, discovering what's unique about people in Edmonton and out west. Is there something that you've grown to love about Albertans that you didn't know? I mean, I know something about the Alberta culture because I pastored in Grand Prairie, Alberta. But what is distinctive about Albertans, if anything, that you can tell? And is there something that you've grown fond of?
Yeah, well, I certainly grow fond of every place I live in. I love people. Yeah, I'm speaking to two people who've lived in Alberta, so I'll be careful. I think I was born in Alberta at one point. I think what's beautiful about Albertans and the whole question of contextualization, and I appreciate how you're leading me into the point of relating and making that our goal. Albertans are very, I understand, very objective. Let's get to the point. Let's get done what needs to be done. Not too much drama about things, and you really notice it even with present pandemic that we're living through right now. There's a roll up the sleeve. Let's do this. Let's do it. And among the Christians, let's do it to the glory of God. Put in the energy, and I really appreciate that. I love that about Albertans. They value the importance of community. And you can really see our signs everywhere. Is Alberta strong? Or if there's a forest fire in Fort Mac, well, Albertans do what? We help each other, and that's a very important aspect of Alberta. And if Alberta proud means we help each other, roll up the sleeves and get through this. So those are some of the highlights I've noticed. I've only lived here for 4 years. And so, again, I do have to qualify that these are some of the first impressions that I've had. And so when we talk about the church and being a witness, being Christian in this community, it's going to involve rolling up the sleeves and being there beside one another as God called us, and using those opportunities to point out, we're doing this for each other, and that love for each other is a gift of God. We are here all made in the image of God to glorify Him. And that's where I think a lot of the work can be done. I find Albertans, well, maybe you know this too, but generally they're in terms of the voting, like we have a United Conservative Party. There's a very strong, I would say, Protestant contingent that are working, have that type of work ethic. That may be behind it, but I haven't done a lot of that analysis at this time.
Yeah, which leads us to the question of putting legs on all of that in terms of mission work in your city. So you're part of something called the Edmonton Mission Board. Is that something is that just from your own church? Is that from more churches together, the Edmonton Mission Board?
Yeah, so I can give a little bit of a history. That there's a whole presentation and everything, but there was a desire when Edmonton called me off the mission field. They did so with apologies. They love mission, and so it was a bit of a toss up. Do we leave him in Brazil? Maybe he can serve here. The neighborhood here there's 25,000 people moving into our neighborhood. And so that was really the focus. So we had some conversations about what that could look like and what that should look like. We had big, meetings where we just brainstormed, had different representatives from all different areas in the business part of Edmonton, from the police department. We have quite a few police members in the congregation, and the construction area. So a whole bunch of different participants in the brainstorming session. And we said, is there a need for some, further outreach, and what would that look like? So we did some research and we found out what other churches are doing. There's a big Christian assembly, West Edmonton Christian Assembly. They have a room in the mall, and we were going to see if we could use that. And that was sort of what we were thinking as an opportunity. And we said, well, if we want to use it, we could just ask them and have our time to use it, and they were okay with that. So we were looking at what kind of project we would have. And as we were looking, we said, you know what, there's just such a list. We can work in the mall, we can work in the university, have something there. We can work with seniors in the different seniors' homes. There's always an opening to bring Bible studies or to just comfort the seniors there. There was opportunities in terms of just having a lecture, and even that, we did it for a while. And people from different interest groups came to that. And we thought, let's keep this open. Let's not say this is what it's going to be. This is what it's going to look like. Let's just say there are many opportunities in our small city, which could have fruit also for neighboring communities. So it started with Emmanuel's, Canadian Reformed Church's mission board, but we right away invited all the churches in on the brainstorming session. We got some sort of soft commitment. If we go forward with this, will it work? Then we got Emmanuel on the budget, so we made sure we had 1 year that we could sustain a worker, support a worker. And then in that year, we asked other churches, and the churches in Edmonton have come on board, as well as churches in surrounding areas. Like Barhead is a community about an hour and a half north of Edmonton. It's a town, and they could see the value of even being connected and having a support of a outreach worker. So in that sense, if you wanted me to give an exact, what are we doing? We're looking for someone right now, and we're looking for someone. And from that person that we have, we're looking to then work out what a reasonable program would look like, or how we would start. So instead of the first initial talk was have a reading room, a center spot. Then we thought, let's make it into a coffee shop. And the nice thing about that is it's neutral. It's a meeting place, have it close to a university. And then we thought, well, we could also go in the other area, downtown area. There's some real outreach points there already where they give clothing, food, shelter. We could work with them. And again, we got into that problem. There's just too many opportunities. So we took a step back and said, let's get a worker first, full-time. None of this, don't count on just volunteers. Not that I don't think we can, but in terms of starting, let's start with a worker. And that's what the support has been. And we really are looking forward to somebody. And if they ask, well, what would you like me to do? We say, sow the seed of the gospel in Edmonton and throw it out liberally. Make sure that, as it goes out, that seed will be out. That's your first step. God will show us where to go from there. The challenge is that that's difficult for people to fathom. It's maybe a little bit frightening. Well, what will it look like in 2 years? Yeah, God knows. And so that's the real focus, is sowing the seed of the gospel in the Edmonton area. Sounds lofty, sounds broad, but I think in terms of the context, that's what we're thinking.
I do think, Julius, it makes a lot of sense to invest in people and to hire someone for this kind of work. Are you looking for a certain kind of candidate? Are you requiring any kind of theological education? What exactly is the profile of this individual you're seeking?
Yeah, and that's been a discussion point and a conversation point. Like I said, we've been having conversation that to have theological ability to understand the scripture and to love them, and to love Jesus Christ and to love that gospel and grace. Part of that love is that willingness to study more, to gain understanding. So in terms of study, yes, but not in the sense of necessarily a particular piece of paper behind that. I think that we didn't want to limit it too much to that. And an ability to communicate and some willingness to work different hours. So
I just didn't know if I qualified or not.
Yeah, did you go through? Did you see the advertisement and wonder about it?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I was going to apply.
Yeah, but you did see it. Well, this is actually a legitimate question. So the question is open. If somebody's listening and thinking, hey, maybe this is something for me, we realize that we're working with something new, but we also want to make it clear that we want to have somebody who does love the Lord, does love the gospel, and does love Edmonton and love the people, every one of them. And to communicate that on a piece of paper is not always easy. You can just say, anybody who loves the Lord, then you might. I'd rather set the bar on a piece of paper a little higher. Although now we're debating, maybe we should somehow recommunicate that job description. Bill, you would certainly fit what we're looking for as Winston is, as most sincere Christians. And I think that the question is, there's the one area of complete trust and freedom, but to give somebody that trust and freedom, there has to be a certain level of an ability to establish that trust. And if you have somebody come in new, I think those are some of the things that we were thinking. So there's two ways of doing it. Just have anybody come in, which is fine, and I believe a lot of different people could do this type of work because we're tailoring the work to fit the person, and then seeing, do we need more people in after, or how is that going to work? So it's quite open. But then if you spend all your time, okay, what did you do? How did that go? And not give enough independence to the worker, that's not really what we're looking for. It's a possibility. So we'd rather use our volunteer and cooperation time effectively participating in the work and not with overseeing people.
Yeah.
That's the general understanding. I'm only one person. There's a committee. I hope I'm reflecting things correctly. So I'm talking big lines here.
Yeah,
that was
and
my
it
job.
speaks to the reality that when you're attempting a new project, you're attempting a new work in a city, it's not like you can just sort of say, oh, here's our plan. This is what you're going to do. You're going to work, 40 hours a week or something like that. It has this creative pioneering aspect to it, much like Bill, when you guys hired Ian in order to start Mercy, it wasn't all laid out clearly exactly what that was going to look like, but it requires, this type of mission work requires you to be a sort of a pioneer, and it's going to mean that you're going to make mistakes along the way, and you're going to have to continually rethink. And as long as you've got a good team there and you're working together, there's just so much hope for it. We're almost at the end of our time here. I wonder, Julius, if there's some people listening in who are like, oh, I would love to perhaps start something like this or think about something like this in our own church, our own classes. What would be just one thing you would say to people that are right at the very beginning of thinking about that? What's one thing that you would say to encourage them?
Yeah, well, the need is very, very great. So you're feeling that it's not just an intellectual feeling; it's a knowledge. The Spirit gives that as well. I think very important is, in my, this is really my opinion, but to have a grassroots love for the gospel, not just a church needs to do mission. So put mission here. Okay, get a board, put that up there, and this is what it's going to look like. But go the other way, like really encourage that grassroots, because if that spirit, if it's not there, what are you sharing? You're just going through motions. And if it's not the love for the gospel, the love for your neighbor that's driving, maybe leave it, for somebody who's going to sincerely do that and be willing. The second thing I would say, and you mentioned it too, it's pioneering work, which is exciting, but your failure rate is very, very high. You said you make some mistakes. As a missionary, I'd look back and I'd be like, yeah, you know what, if I'm batting 20%, 80% times things work, 20 they don't. That flexibility you can have in your worker, but if you don't have that in your supporting body and your supporting congregation, it's going to be endless frustration. So we start here with low expectations in the sense of everything we do is going to work, or whatever we start, we're going to stick with for, 10, 20 years. None of that. we're going to try this, we're going to try that, we're going to try that. And that was it. That's why the picture of sowing the seed is we're going to sow as best as we can. What comes of that, we don't know. Sometimes it falls on good soil and sometimes not. And so I would just make that comment. Let's be realistic. It's the Spirit that works. We're just people. We're just given the gospel. And a congregation has to learn to understand that we take the next step in faith. We can't give you the whole plan. And we're going to do things. You're going to go, why did we do that? Like, who thought a coffee shop was a good idea? And to Eric Watkins, he already had the name for the shop. If you want to use it, he copyrighted it. But he said Calvin and Hops would be a perfect name for our little pub, our little Reformed pub. So I thought I'd share that.
Well, let's leave it with Calvin and Hops, and let's leave certainly with that great encouragement, Julius. That may God grant us all a grassroots, deep, heartfelt love for our neighbor, and may it be love that pushes us forward in mission and evangelism. Thanks so much for spending time with us. Thanks so much for blessing us with all of that. And man, there's many more questions we'd like to ask, but that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity and the excellent questions.
I hope that this has been an encouraging conversation for all of you, and that you'll join us soon for our next session as Bill and I interview the famous blogger and evangelical author Tim Challies, who at one time was a member of a Canadian Reformed church. So join us for that session next time as we celebrate and be challenged here at Tyrannus Hall, a grace-filled space to discuss the missional mandate of the Canadian Reformed churches.